So I was reviewing your consultation form. So you got Masha,
Yes.
and seems like some fear. I think you labeled it fear aggressive tendencies. Children, I think, coming into her personal space, or like just random people, was it?
Yeah, it's pretty much people is what I've concluded. And there's been a few instances that I can specifically call out. I know I referenced a few in the
Yeah.
form, but I just really think it's people coming into her space, and it's that initial introduction. She's very timid at first, and then she warms up, but it kind of has to be on her terms.
Okay. So go ahead and walk me through those instances, because there's a couple you mentioned, but you said you go in more detail.
Yeah. So I think the very first time is, and just for background, I adopted her in February, not knowing that, we would be spending every waking day together.
Yeah.
So the training was always on the horizon, but with all the other things in the way, it just, we're getting to it now. But I adopted her in February. Her history isn't super clear, except she came from Alabama, and I had connected with her foster in Alabama. And she was recovering from heartworm. She was really limited on activity for a while. And so she actually lived with kids, and apparently she was great with kids, but I'm sure she also wasn't really super active because they were keeping her crated and hanging out because of the heartworm. So figuring out her history, but so she was great, March, April, May, June. In June, we went to, when things started to kind of open up again, we went camping. I finally got to see my brothers and all my nieces and my nephew. So 6 kids total from the ages of 3 to 12. And both basically 11 new people for her. And we went camping in Iowa. It was really hot. Her and I slept in our own little tent, and it was, she had to stay on leash because there were other dogs around, other kids around, other families, distance, but still in the same general area, all unfamiliar surroundings. And we drove there, and it's about a 5-hour drive. So understand the first day was challenging for her. When she first met my 2 nieces, it was like limited exposure, and she was fine with them at first. They pet her, they walked her everything was fine. And then when my one niece went to pet her again, she growled. And that was the first time I've ever seen any type of since February, that was the first time I ever heard her growl towards a human, ever. So that was a little strange. And then my brother went to, show his daughter how to pet her properly, thinking that he knew. And when he went to try to pet her, she growled at him. So all right, maybe it was just too much with the travel. She doesn't do great in the car. She's very stressed in the car. She just sits there and pants and stares at me. So, I'm trying to expose her to things, and it was probably too much for her. So we let her be. The time went on, and then my other brother arrived with his kids. Same thing, very limited, it wasn't all the kids coming up to her at once. But what had happened over the course of that weekend, we were there for 3 days, is that she would, in spurts, sometimes she just wasn't into the petting. They would try to pet her. They would run near her. She was stressed out, panting the whole time. When they were running and yelling and being kids, I kept her at a distance after she had growled. And then, then another day went by, and they were able to pet her, and everything was fine. When she would lay down with us and she was sweet, she would give them kisses. And then the next day, or within a few hours, they would run by, try to pet her again, and she would growl. And then she did try to nip at one of my nieces, and I think I know why, but I'm not trying to justify it, but she did try to nip at one of my nieces. So that was the last straw where I was like, I need to figure out what's causing this. I've never experienced it before. Mm-hmm. And that was the first situation with the kids, and it was really just the growling, the clearly uncomfortable being around them. Do you want me to go into the other instances or elaborate on this one? So this last weekend, we went, this was a recent thing, and it has nothing to do with kids. We went on the 606 trail. So we walked on that trail. It's a bit, I'm in Lincoln Park, so it's a bit far for us to get there initially. So I'm trying to expose her to the car more and get her more comfortable. So we took a car there, and she threw up in the car, which I was prepared for. So she was just a little out of it, but several hours went by after that, and she loves to walk. We walked the trail with a friend that she knew. And then we went to Big Star, the outdoor patio. And this was only the second time that she was in a patio setting. So I had her next to me, but I wanted to like try to get her around to be part of my lifestyle and around other situations. And she normally is great with other dogs, other animals, but I think it was just all too much for her. So she wasn't really calm the whole time. She just kind of sat there, and she's laying on me at the moment too. So overall, she's a calm dog, but she was sitting next to us at the table. Everything was fine. About half an hour in, the busboy comes to bring our food and came from behind and startled. Actually, I didn't even see him coming, and he startled her, obviously. So he startled her, and the next thing me and my friend hear is her, I don't even know how to describe the sound. It was like a growl snarl. It was kind of intense.
Sure.
I've never heard that from her. And
Yeah.
she had lunged at him. And then the manager came out to talk to us, and he looked back, and he can't, with the mask, it's hard to tell like what reaction a person is having. But the manager came out to tell us that he had a small hole in his pants. So she had bit his pants.
Yeah.
And no skin or anything. And they just like, just asked me to keep her closer, and it was fine. We didn't get kicked out or anything. And then obviously
Sure.
just ate quickly and left. And so that was really upsetting. And oftentimes too, when strangers try to pet her, which they do because she's a small, cute dog who looks friendly, they will just go to pet her, and I pull her away, but that's too much for her. She barks now. So now she barks, and she gets scared especially if men try to pet her, and so those are the patterns that I've noticed. But the most recent incident at Big Star was the first time that she's, I guess, like lunged at someone like that, and it was because it came from behind, in my opinion.
Okay. Anything else?
I think again, it's all the other, like, she will bark at strangers if they're approaching her, if they're trying to be in her space.
Sure.
I think with the kids, it was just the first time I've ever seen that. And I do have a lot of nieces and nephew, and they are important to me. So that was what I originally wanted to focus on. But this past weekend, noticing it just seems like an overall stress where she's just on edge. Yeah.
And then I'm just make sure I heard this correctly, because you got her in February. Obviously, you weren't planning for a pandemic quarantine.
Yeah.
And going back to the first instance with the camping site, I think it was like 11 people, you said?
Well, yes, total.
Yeah. So from my understanding, it was quarantine, and then you went to meet your family sometime later. And that was when you noticed everything starting.
Yes, and I also want to just say too that I live in a high-rise building with an elevator, and like even with quarantine, there were some interactions with people on the street. I live on North Clark, so there, it's not like she's never seen a human before, and then suddenly it's 11 people. But this was the first time that I think she, was around that many people and in that environment.
Sure.
But yes, everything you said is correct.
How old is she?
So she's almost 2. She'll be 2 in November. Because she's a rescue, same thing. I don't know if that's accurate. She plays very much like a puppy.
Sure.
And her vet had said that she has a little bit more plaque than they would have expected for a dog her age when I first got her in February.
Sure. And then with the previous family that had kids, do we know if they were in the city or in a standalone home or anything like that?
I can find out. She had connected with me on Facebook. I can find out, but they were in Alabama. So
Alabama. Okay, so I'm gonna assume probably like home.
Yeah.
Okay.
That is my guess. She sent me pictures of Masha like cuddling up with her daughter, just sleeping with her.
Do we know at what age they had Masha at?
They just got, Masha was only in Chicago for less than 24 hours when I got her. So they had her right before I did for 2 months.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So they got her essentially after a year.
About, yeah.
Yeah, probably like a year and 3-4 months, a couple months. And got her, and it's been about 6 months maybe. Okay, cool. So all of this stuff for me is not out the ordinary. I'll probably just because this is what I do, so these cases find me. So there's a couple of things here, because when I was reading over your consultation form, it was, there's realistic and unrealistic expectations, okay? And I isolate for people, I'm very transparent, and I go, this is what I would realistically expect, but this is also sometimes attainable, but we don't know. It all just depends on, like, because I have the dog, I have the owner, and then I have the variable of the environment, okay? Right. And they're all variables. The dogs tend to be the easiest because dogs tend to be consistent. It's really the owner and then the environments that are the biggest variables for me, okay? So, definitely some kind of fear-based tendencies, okay? Yeah. Now, I know you said she lived in Alabama with the family of 2 kids, right? But there's a big difference here. One is it's Alabama. So it's very common where I get clients that get a dog in suburbs, Illinois, or small town Michigan or whatever, and the dog's perfectly fine, right? And then they move to like South Loop or like Lakeview, Chicago, and all of a sudden the dog is lunging at people, it's lunging at dogs, it has separation anxiety. There's all these issues that crop up, and they're like, why? And I go, well, in the suburb or in like small town Michigan, very quiet, very slow. We're so used to traffic and sound and bar noises and people talking and stuff that it doesn't really bother us. But for dogs, that's energy, if you will, right? So like, if you go to like downtown Michigan where the water tower is Chicago, like you can just hear the cars, the honking, the people, like it's just very high intensity. That's a lot of energy, right? But we're used to it. Not for dogs. Okay, for dogs, it can be a bit much. So that's one variable, okay, is that you're in, high rise in Chicago, a bit busier. So that can already cause some kind of unsettledness there. The other thing is, those 2 kids were in the home, as opposed to bringing her into an environment where there's kids, okay? So those are very different things for dogs. So dogs see things in pictures, if you will. Okay, that's how they interpret things. That's why people say, oh, at home, my dog doesn't like people coming inside the home. But if I meet someone at the park, if I meet someone at someone else's house, if I meet them, at a patio, my dog is very friendly. And I go, yeah, because in your home, that's your territory. Everything else is community space. So that particular dog is just showing more territorial tendencies within the home, which makes sense. But then outside, it's like, well, there's nothing for me to be territorial over because this isn't my space.
Right.
Okay. So the biggest factor here, and this has been a really big thing ever since the pandemic, is quarantine. Okay. I had, before quarantine hit, I had about 30 to 40 clients on my calendar, and that went down to 0. Okay. And within the first 2 weeks to maybe 4 weeks of quarantine, I got about 4 to 5 emails and texts from people who were behavior cases that were doing great, but then once quarantine hit, all of a sudden behavior started flaring up. And it was because the entire, the daily structure got turned on its head, and the dog or dogs, they weren't used to it. And all of a sudden, all these things are cropping up, okay? Or for other people, it was like you're saying, I was quarantined for 3 months with this dog. And now I'm trying to go back to social life or, have people come over and things are kind of dying down a bit. Now my dog is being territorial, my dog is being human aggressive, whatever. I go, yeah, because one, the dog was either antisocial, just like the human was, for X amount of time, or the behaviors were already there, but you didn't get to see them immediately like most people would because there was delayed introduction to the real world or to your normal life. Okay. Yeah. So it's normal in the sense of everything happening, just not like acceptable, if you will, like in the human world, right? Because if Masha bites someone, obviously that's liability, and there's like more things that come with it. Yeah. So because I had another case that trained with me, and when they trained with me, there was no issues. They just needed him to stop jumping because he was too excited, like people too much, and then obedience. So we did that. And then they finished the program, but that was mid-quarantine. And then maybe 2 weeks ago, I believe, we did a Zoom call because all of a sudden now, because now they're having family come over again, is now he's growling at, before he used to jump out of excitement, now he's growling at people. Okay, and then he actively tried to nip at a child. In their case, they had drove to Ohio, and then while they're at Ohio, they're at a park, and some kid came up and like was like, "Can I pet your dog?" And they're like, "Yeah, sure," right? But she said, you know, the whole trip to Ohio, he was panting a lot, and I said that's anxiety. He was under stress,
Yeah.
and then when they were at the park, he was anxious as well. So I told her it was all these stressors stacking, and then you add in the kid, and the dog's like, "No," right?
Yeah.
Um, but all that to me makes sense. Okay, so like me being me and like a dog trainer and specializing in behavior, I would recognize these things and one, proactively address them because I know how, or two, even if I didn't know how to address those things and I saw a kid approaching, I'd be like, you know what, my dog is clearly under stress. I'm not gonna add in possibly more stress. Okay,
Yeah.
but it's very similar scenario. He went from loving people too much to all of a sudden, you know, 4 months into quarantine, um, uh, being suspicious of people coming into the home now. Okay, so it's normal if you understand dog behavior, because since not being exposed, it's made them more cautious, more suspicious, because now people coming over is out the ordinary as opposed to being the ordinary. Okay,
Yeah.
so to give you an example of this, you know, do you ever take the CTA train or bus?
Before March. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's say you're on a busy train, right? It's a lot of people, and there's two seats empty. One seat is next to you, and one seat's across the train, right?
Mm-hmm.
Someone sits down next to you. How do you feel about that?
Well, yeah, I don't feel comfortable
Okay.
personally. I just
Personally,
don't, I would prefer, I mean, if there's another seat across, I
you
like my
prefer to
space
go
as
with that.
well. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So let's keep the situation, but in this case, there's only you and one other person on the train, so tons of
Mm-hmm.
empty seats, and then the
Yeah.
person sits next to you still.
I don't, yeah, I wouldn't feel comfortable. I think that something's up,
Yeah, that's really
or
weird.
they'll try to talk to me and I don't want to. Yeah.
So for a lot of people, they go, well, if it's a really busy train, I don't mind it as much, right?
Yeah.
Because clearly there's only two seats, one's next to me. But if it's
Right.
like 30 empty seats, it's like, why would you choose the one next to me,
Yeah.
right? So because there's ordinary and kind of out the ordinary, right? So that's the same thing for the dog. Ordinary was people kept coming over on some kind of regular basis, and then there was all of a sudden this space of like no one's going to come over. Now it's seemingly out the ordinary.
Yeah.
Okay, so once you understand behavior, it's you can kind of predict things and prevent things from happening. So the way I operate is I'm all for getting the dog over things, okay, and getting them comfortable. But at the same time, there's never a guarantee of it's going to happen, because the only being that can change the mind about how they feel about something is the dog.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you don't like something, you personally, no one can change your opinion but yourself,
Yeah.
right?
I was gonna say I totally agree and I understand that. I think what is a little bit strange to me is that I actually don't really notice too much consistency with her,
Mhm.
um, because she doesn't. It's not like she'll like growl. Like we, I mean, I live right next to Lincoln Park, and we go to Oz Park and all that, and there will be kids everywhere. She does not give two shits if there's a child. It's
Mhm.
only if, you know, again, the only time I've ever seen her act that way is when in that situation when they are approaching her, but not even just approaching her softly. It's just, I think that was a stressful time. Um, and I would have never even brought her to camping if I had, you know, because she was exposed to kids here as well. Coffee shop before, you know, in February, before it was inappropriate, where a little child was like learning to walk in a coffee shop nearby. And she, you know, she came over to him and licked her face, and it was just very sweet and very gentle. So, and same thing in the elevator here, there's kids, and in the lobby, she doesn't really care. She won't ever growl. If anything, she's more curious. Same thing with people. And it's not like she'll like growl or bark at every single man that reaches down to pet her, every single woman. It doesn't seem super consistent. And I think sometimes I can find, you know, like the patio situation made sense to me. That reaction, while not justified, it made sense to me why she reacted that way in that situation towards that human. And with my nieces in that camping environment with all the stressors, now in hindsight, I understood more, I think, about why she reacted. But the consistency has been odd. Like my friend is actually visiting. My friend is staying with me and visiting. It's the first time they've met. And so I brought her down with Masha down with me to, instead of having my friend enter my home,
Sure.
I brought her down, introduced her outside. We did a little walk together. She got to sniff her, she got to see her, and we entered the building together. She's great. And then she was cuddling up, giving kisses. Then when it was time for bed, my friend just changed her shirt and put her hair in a bun. Very same person, just slightly different appearance. And Masha
Sure.
was barking at her when she saw her. But then
Yeah.
again, it's like, so it's an interesting pattern. I just haven't noticed too much consistency with her because it's just not, maybe we haven't had that much of a sample size yet.
Right. And I can, like, when you say these things, I can, in the back of my head, I'm coming up with like reasons why. It's probably too much to talk about. We'll spend more time trying to talk about it. But for me, I go, well, one thing is when you first got her, right, is dogs won't show their true colors typically until 2 to 4 weeks after you get them. Okay. So like when you said February, coffee shop, kid and stuff, she was sweet licking the kid or whatever, right? I go, well, that was, if it was just when she got her, then she's in that kind of period of where the dog's still trying to figure out what's going on. Okay. So that's potential why. In terms of within the building and stuff, because that's her norm, it's possible that she's more comfortable there because, again, camping ground, out of her norm. She was in the car for 5 hours or whatever. Stresses were high, right? So those are things that right away I start factoring in that most people don't, okay?
Yeah.
As opposed to your friend, I know it sounds silly, but yeah, things like that can sometimes trigger dogs, okay? And it can also be a sign of nervousness.
Yeah.
So, there's fear, anxiety, nervousness, and then like aggression, and then like maybe like overstimulation are the most common behaviors that I deal with. And they each look a certain way. So the whole, she was fine with your friend and all of a sudden there's a tiny change and then the barking happened is most likely a nervous response. Okay.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean anything good or bad. It's just, that's your dog. Okay.
Yeah.
It's really, again, just me educating you and going, if I know I have this kind of dog that's, fear nervous, I can already anticipate and kind of predict what the dog will do. And I can also be ahead one step because since I know those things, I know what's going to trigger the dog. So then I can always be there to address. Okay. And it's a balance of both these things. Anything else about Masha that I should know?
Yes, I think. So she's laying next to me now. Otherwise I would show the tail, but so she has a half a tail. I don't know how to explain it. It's what?
You said it was a hot dog?
Yeah, I don't know how else to describe it because it doesn't look like, oh man, I wish I could show you. It doesn't look like it was an intentionally amputated, how some breeds do. And all the breeds in her, like she just, I think something happened, especially because at first, and now with me and with other people that she knows, she's much more comfortable, but she had a lot of sensitivity and still kind of has some sensitivity around her butt and tail area.
Sure.
So before, if her leash would, like if she would jump and her leash got tangled in her tail, she would spaz and she would, run in circles. And if somebody was walking by and had a bag that like accidentally, because she's little, so accidentally like tap the back of like her butt tail area, she would spaz. But it was like a freak out, so it's either like a pain or sensitive area. And same thing too, I think because she had her heartworm injections, they were in her little butt area as well. So she just had a lot of sensitivity. And, we've come miles, but she's still very sensitive in that area. So sometimes if someone's coming from behind, like that busboy did, maybe it was too close to her really sensitive area. And so she's still very protective of her butt. I don't know how else to put it, but.
Yeah, I mean, there's things that we can do to counter condition that. I'm not gonna argue the whatever happened either prior or like you said, all those shots and stuff has created some kind of distrust of the rear end. There are exercises around that we can do. Whether or not she completely gets over that is really up to Masha.
Yeah.
And I'll start to kind of go into like the training approach and then how I go about addressing these issues. Okay.
Okay.
Now, before reaching out, I'm assuming you did research on us and stuff like that.
I did. Yep.
Okay,
I
cool.
watched some of the videos as well.
Excellent. So you're aware that we use e-collar and prong collar.
Yeah.
Okay. So I rarely, if ever, use prong collar because it takes too much technical skill for the average dog owner. And people tend to tense up already, like they always have their arms up here to restrain the dog, and then you couple that with a prong collar, and it just creates too much frustration. But also, like, it's more effective. It's definitely a really good tool. I love it. I use it. But in terms of results and control, e-collar is the one tool that gets me consistency. Okay, so it's like, I know there's a lot of trainers and there's a lot of different methods, you know, the primary ones being positive reinforcement, food-based stuff, and only food-based with no consequences. And then you have prong collar, and then you have e-collar, okay? Food has the lowest ceiling, okay? It's maybe your dog does great within the home, but then once you go outside in the real world, everything doesn't matter anymore, okay? And I don't care what you have in your hand, like chicken, steak, whatever. If the dog's like, I'd rather chase that squirrel, your dog's gonna chase the squirrel. Okay.
Yeah. She's
Prong
like
collar.
that for sure.
Prong collar is much better, but the problem is, one, if I'm dealing with the dog with behavior issues and their intensity is too great, that a correction from the prong collar will not break through that intensity, the owner is stuck. So then they're yanking their dog and the dog doesn't stop. Or the dog does great, but then when you take the leash off, the dog knows you no longer have control, so now they won't be as reliable off leash.
Mm-hmm.
E-collar gets me control on or off leash, doesn't matter, and I know if I can stop a behavior as long as the owner is willing to go to the extent needed, okay? So it gets me consistency. As long as the owner does the homework, I know I can get it done, okay? So people typically look at the e-collar as the last resort. Like, I think your dog needs an e-collar or whatever, like they just paint this really bad picture on it. I've built my career on using solely remote collar. To me, it's the first resort, because why would I waste time on all this other stuff that either is too complicated or doesn't work, okay? E-collar is easy for the owner to learn. I get off-leash reliability right off the bat, but then also for your case in particular, if your dog is fear aggressive, okay, and her biting someone, this is the dog's mentality, she is, for whatever reason, perceiving threat, okay? And she's going, I don't know you, I'm scared of you, and I'm gonna warn you, if the person keeps touching or pressing that boundary, she may bite and go, hey, I warned you, leave me alone. So that's what we call a fear aggressive dog, right? So in order to get her over that, we have to correct the aggressive response. But if you use a prong collar, if the correction is coming from you, you know, she's growling at the person, you have the prong on, she growls, you yank her. In my theory, for the dog's logic, it's like, why would you correct me? I'm scared for my well-being here.
Yeah.
Okay. So then it doesn't make sense to the dog. Okay, because you're her trusted person. Okay.
Yeah.
So with food, it's great for, yes, for counter conditioning, making the dog feel better about the situation. But I get dogs, man, you could be 20 feet away throwing steak from across the yard and they're still like, screw you, like I'm gonna attack you. And it has no phase on the dog, okay? It's great as an additive, like something we can incorporate to say, yes, we want this, and then this we don't want, right? But positive reinforcement is only good for things you want to see again. It's not good for stopping things, okay? Does not work for stopping things. With e-collar, if I go to touch her, and I don't know if you've ever seen it, if you saw any of my videos where I have like a big old suit on. So when we get a fear aggressive case, they're scared of contact. So I wear my suit so that I can make contact, okay? So the dog can attack. And then with the e-collar, we can correct the behavior. So we teach the dog, don't attack, right? Biting is bad. Biting receives a consequence. But then for the dog psychology, they go, all right, You came and approached me, you made contact with me, I did self-defense, you weren't scared of me, you did not back away, but then I also got this correction, right? So then I keep repeating this process till I can pet the dog, and you'll see them clearly under stress, but they're not biting anymore. So now the dog's learning, oh, I don't have to bite you, you're not gonna hurt me, and if I don't do anything, nothing happens with this collar. Okay, so that's how we like reprogram them. Okay, to get them used to touch, because in order to get her over the fear of, you know, people, you have to do what she fears most, which is contact. Okay. And then we start working that up towards other people. Like I take the blunt of it, and then once I go, okay, I think she's good, now we can start socializing her. Then I give you exercises, and yes, we can absolutely use food to pair, right? So it's like if you bite someone, there's a consequence, but when you let them pet you and nothing bad happens, not only does she get a positive experience, but then we give that food in from the thing, like maybe the child, like hot dog or whatever, and she goes, oh, and I get something really good out of it. Okay.
Yeah.
So we have exercises, we can absolutely press these things, but because she's an animal and she's a living, breathing creature, there's no guarantee that we can actually make a 180. That's just being realistic. Okay. We absolutely press for it. Whether or not it happens, it's just, that's the unknown. Okay. What we can do is get her under control so that she's not, how would you say, the one triggering, you know? Like it's one thing, like I get clients who can't even walk outside because their dog lunges at everyone and everything, right? So I'll go, don't even worry about people touching your dog. Just worry about walking your dog and the dog not being a jerk, right? And that's it, right? So that might be the minimum that we get, but they're like, I'm fine with that. It's like, I just want to walk my dog, right? I go, fine. But then in other cases, they want to press for sociability, so then I give them the exercises. But then just take into mind that it requires you, because I can only do so much by myself. I'm only one person. In order to counter condition fully, you need to expose to many.
Yeah.
Okay?
I was just gonna say, I've been doing a lot of what you're saying already, just because, you know, I've had the time on my hands, with, again, trying to expose her, even like people want to pet her. I don't like it, and she needs to learn in some way. So I've been trying with some of the positive reinforcement for food, like giving them treats and trying to interact that way with certain, like with strangers, right? Because I always bring treats with me. Or if she passes a kid in a stroller running by her and she doesn't really do anything at all, positive reinforcement for that. And she can coexist, but and she's also like, if she's nervous though, she doesn't care about food, to your point. She won't even eat it. She'll just drop the food on the floor or just look at me like confused, because she's nervous and she's scared, and like she's not super food motivated, compared to, I think, a lot of other dogs.
Yeah, and that's normal for a dog with behavioral issues because of stress. Like if you're in a burning building, you're not trying to grab a brownie on the way out. You're just like, get me the hell out of here, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And when you mentioned earlier, there's something about where you were saying that you've been exposing her more to see if she would get better, right? Is the difference is if there's nothing to settle her, okay, if there's nothing to settle her down, you're really just bringing her to a stress level that's not being resolved. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So
I was just going to ask, go ahead. I was going to ask what you recommend then to settle her down. Is that where the e-collar comes in?
Yes, because the e-collar can snap the brain out of it.
Okay.
Okay, because so like, let's go back to the stressor of me touching her. Okay. And, you know, I'm just going to assume she starts biting in self-defense, right? Is I'm putting her under stress, and I'm putting her under great stress. And if I keep touching her, it may resolve itself where she'll give up, but the next time I see her, she's going to do it again. Okay. So it doesn't get better. The e-collar gets her to stop the behavior. And what I'm wanting is the next time I come back to touch her, we don't see the behavior. Okay. That's how we start the counter conditioning, or the reprogramming of how she feels about things. Is something has to disrupt her mental state or emotional state so she can go, oh, someone can touch me and I don't have to be nervous or fearful.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to then respond with aggression. It's okay. I'm not going to get hurt. Right.
Yeah.
That's how we start reprogramming. But if I just make contact and nothing happens or stops her, the next time I see her, she's just going to trigger again. Okay. So the e-collar is what allows you to stop everything. So, and I was actually just talking with a client about this the other day because she's got a super, not client, a consult the other day. We were at Oz and the dog was just super on edge, barking at everything. Mm-hmm. And she's like, I expose him and I give him Prozac and all that stuff, but he's just still all over the place. And I go, because nothing is settling him down. Okay, so imagine, have you ever seen a movie where someone's freaking out and they slap them?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then like all of a sudden, like what? You know, they're like, get a grip, right? It's that physicality, you know, and I don't want you to think that we come in and just like slam the dog, because that's not how we work. But you need something, another dog. Okay, to give you an example, many years ago when I first started my business and I was operating from home, I took a dog from Wisconsin for a board and train. It was a very anxious dog. And when they dropped her off, I had to do computer work, so I didn't have time to like acclimate her. So like I just brought her in and I knew she wasn't dog aggressive and I just sat down and started working on my computer. And she kept pacing in my living room, okay? And my pitty, Alexi, was sitting at my feet and then she was just looking and all of a sudden I feel her get up and start walking towards the living room. So then I watch, because the way she was walking was just very stoic, very slow, very much like in charge. And she walked over and postured that dog, like shoulder to shoulder as she was walking around. And right when she was coming and passing, she just bit her, okay, or nipped at her. She didn't puncture, okay, so boom. And the dog yelped. And then my pit walked away. And the dog sat down and was panting, and then 5 minutes later fell asleep. So my pit was like, this energy is not going to happen here. And she went and nipped the dog to say, cut it out. That's not acceptable. Okay. She wasn't being aggressive or anything. She was just saying that energy is not allowed here, and corrected her. Okay. So like at a dog park, I don't know if you've ever seen, like if one dog gets out of line, all the dogs will charge in, right? Because they regulate each other in their world. Okay. But they do it through physicality.
It's interesting too, because she loves dogs. And she loves to play and loves to run and do all that. But whenever that does happen at a dog park where, you know, some dog is yapping or there's like a little weird mini fight or somebody's humping or something, she'll like she'll kind of join and she'll just stand there. Like she kind of goes closer to the group, but she won't even enter the group. Like she's just an observer from the side.
Not like a moderator.
No, and I don't know, part of it too is like somebody else had told me, another trainer had told me that she appears insecure, that she's not quite confident in herself when we're, you know, especially in unfamiliar people, unfamiliar environments. And again, I'm sure that she sees people who try to come up to her as threats, to your point, as opposed to like just wanting to pet her. But I did have when I first got her, again, because this was the very beginning quarantine and I had to work from home since March. And so she was super quiet at first. She, again, didn't really have any reason to bark or anything. And then, of course, like day one of working from home, there was so many triggers and she started barking a lot. Anytime she would hear a noise in the hallway or outside, and it seemed to have come, you know, out of nowhere at the time. And because my options were super limited and it was just a super stressful time for myself as well and everything else, a friend had recommended a bark collar, but not any, like a one that just vibrates, but it's like, it makes little noise. So I ordered one in the meantime to try that, to help with the barking, because it wasn't aggressive, just really loud and you know. And she got so scared of the bark collar, just seeing it, anything around her too, she would just run and hide and pee a little bit. And so I'm just curious to see how she would do with something like an e-collar.
It's not uncommon that dogs will freak out more over the vibrate than they do over the stim. Okay, now bark collars operate differently than e-collars. Okay, bark collars have, if you're doing the stim version, which is the contraction, they typically have about 5 to 7 levels, because it's just to stop a behavior. They don't care if the dog likes it or not, it's just stop the behavior. Okay. Our collars go to 127. So 7 and 127 are the same, but I have 120 more divisions. Okay, so it's very nuanced. Whereas 1 to 2 or 2 to 3 have very big jumps in terms of intensity because it's just trying to stop behavior. Okay, and I actually have a dog whose video's up. I can't remember. I think it was the first one. His name is Leo. He's a Aussie Doodle, I think it was. And his owners trained him on the vibrate, and they said it freaked him the hell out. And I was like, I never use vibrate. I always use the stim. And then he responded way better, like 99% better on the stim than he did the vibrate. And for the human, they're going, why is it that the thing that hurts him, he responds to better, but the vibrate freaks him out? I go, 1, because in the animal world, things don't vibrate.
Yeah.
Nature, unless it's an earthquake, right? 2, dogs are about physicality. They bite each other. Okay.
Yeah.
The stim is physical. So it's just people's mentality with physicality that creates an issue with dogs. So are you familiar with Cesar Millan, the dog whisperer, right? So old dog whisperer, like he would use his hand to correct dogs, or he'd do like a tap at the back of his foot. So he was using physicality to stop a behavior. And the reason why it was so effective is because he was communicating with the dogs on their level.
Yeah.
Okay. But the world has just, turned around, like progressively gotten softer and thinking that everything can be addressed with positivity and treats and stuff. And that's simply a lie. Okay.
With the barking, I've tried just recently, like this past week, to every time she does bark, especially in that situation with my friend, I just grabbed her snout, and that calmed her down, to like hold her, and it calmed her down just because, again, they don't have anything else. So I'm learning with it, but yeah, I'm not as familiar with e-collars just because I've never had to use them before.
Sure. So e-collar, have you ever been to a chiropractor or physical therapist?
I have.
You ever had TENS or the stim therapy? The thing that moves your muscles?
Like a little machine?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, that's an e-collar.
Okay.
Okay, so it's not electricity, it's not a taser. It's a miniaturized 10 unit. You can go to Walgreens and buy the same technology. So
okay.
It's what they use on people's backs to relax muscles or ease back pain. It's the same machine that they use to recreate labor contraction pains in men.
Okay.
Have you ever seen those videos? Obviously, they're at a very high level because they're trying to create that level of discomfort, but that's an e-collar. Okay? People tend to think it's like electrocution. They think it's like a current running through the dog's body. It's not that. That's not the case at all. It's centralized to where we're taking contact, and it just moves the muscles like that. Okay? So the reason why it's effective is, 1, because dogs are physical animals. 2, it's a neutral, so the dog doesn't know where it's coming from. 3, it removes any frustration because now everything's at the press of a button. So like, with prong collar, if someone's trying to correct their dog and the dog isn't complying, they have to get firmer, but then people naturally get frustrated. So then they get angry. And the next thing you know, you're incorporating anger with these physical actions, and that creates issues. Okay, it's not the correction that creates issues, because I've corrected dogs very harshly throughout my career when needed, but I'm always neutral. But because of the owner, they're used to, that they've been around the dog the whole time. The dog's already kind of pissing them off as it is because of the behaviors they're struggling with. They tend to have a lower level of patience for their dog. And then for me, like if I got pissed off at someone's dog, that looks bad on me. So I have to have patience, right? But e-collar removes all that stuff. Okay? Yeah. So, and also, like, again, earlier when I said, if she's scared of being touched, in order to get her over that, I have to touch her. And if she acts out, I have to correct it. But if I correct her with a prong collar, now that just reinforces the fear. Because she's thinking, she's perceiving threat. And then I touch her and she does self-defense. And then I correct her for defending herself. It makes no sense.
Yeah.
Okay, e-collar is complete neutral. There's no sound. There's nothing going on. The dog just thinks it came out of nowhere, and when they bite, it happens. So then they decide to do other things. Okay.
So would the same thing though apply for like the growling? And she will, if someone tries to pet her or approach her, especially if it's not in, our home or a place that she's more familiar with, then she'll actually back away.
Yeah.
And then the person, so it's really like, it's a like, please don't. And then the only times that she will growl or bark is if, again, if she feels probably trapped and like can't physically move away, or if she's on the leash, I know she feels a little bit more trapped.
Yep.
But with the e-collar, like it's just, yeah, I'm thinking of how she would react.
Right. So, in my experience, it can be one thing I expect the dog to do is pee, poop, or vomit.
Yeah,
Okay?
she pees a little bit. Mm-hmm.
But you have to get that out the way, otherwise she doesn't get better. She never learns to handle the situation. Not the e-collar doesn't cause that. It's more often than not the touch.
Yeah.
I've touched dogs and they'll just like express their anal glands because they're so under stress and there's no e-collar involved. I go, that's how scared your dog is, right?
Yeah.
The e-collar, if needed, just helps stop any negative responses like the aggression, right? Because so like let's say we did food and stuff and you never did e-collar, nothing's ever told her not to bite people. So it's always an option.
Right.
Okay, that's what's missing. Or if she's under too much stress because nothing's getting her to stop the mental lock, then she's not going to even care about the food. Okay. Now your case is it would be a blend of things. Okay. So the only thing that I find that needs to be targeted directly would be the physical touch. Okay. So I actually have about 5 cases right now that are similar to yours, but they're not fear-based, they're nervous-based. Okay.
How do you identify the difference then between fear and nervousness based on dog behavior?
So nervous energy will gradually actually accept the person, but when that person moves, they'll trigger. Okay, and they'll start barking again. And then when everything calms down, they'll settle. And if that person moves, they'll bark again. Okay. Fearful energy wants to always stay away and typically stay suspicious and doesn't like really settle. So like, let's say you just had.
Oh, I was going to say, I mean, so another example, I don't know, based on that, I feel like it's a little bit more nervousness. We have so my friend who's visiting, we were on our roof, me, Masha, and my friend, and turns out that one of her friends lives in my building from somewhere else. So her and her boyfriend, her very tall boyfriend, came upstairs to meet us. I had the dog already, and I told him, like, please, she needs some time to warm up. Please don't try to pet her right now, And so he sat down because everyone loves dogs. So he was trying to pet her, respected me not to. They just sat down, kept to themselves. And she went over to him and to the friend, sniffed them, started giving kisses, all that, and then allowed him to pet her. At one point he petted her butt a little bit and she wasn't a fan of that. So she growled out of nowhere, but she did come back. So that's what I'm saying is like the consistency thing is a little strange, where if it's a stranger on the street who keeps trying to pet her, she will bark and she's not into it and will not approach them. If it's maybe in an environment where, we were sitting, this is her home, more familiarity, then she willingly approached them to sniff them. And then she was all, jumping on them, giving them kisses, positioning herself in a way to be pet. So I just don't know if it's like fully fear or nervousness or a combo.
It can be a mixture of both. There's never, like, I'm not going to say never. I get purely fear-based cases and stuff like that, but they can be nervous, anxious, fearful. Like it can be all three. But what how I interpret it just depends on how the dog is responding in the moment. Where I'll say this is fear and this is coming up nervousness or whatever. But that does sound like more of a nervous dog in that setting, where she was just a bit cautious. But then after she opened up, she's like, "Oh, okay, cool." Whereas a fearful dog will always stay back. They don't want to initiate. It takes them a long, long time if they're going to initiate anything on their own. But it doesn't mean that she can't be fearful in other environments.
Yeah, that's kind of what it sounds like, because she's even in the elevator and stuff, she won't ever jump on anyone, but she will sniff the feet of like anyone who sits there, and she's curious.
Sure.
So she will approach people, but those are the ones who don't approach her. So I'm sure it's a combo, but I think from what you're saying, it's probably mainly what I've seen is nervous with a few a few like random strangers who she was fearful of on the street, like people
Yeah.
who probably had no business running up to us.
Right. I mean, everything that she's doing is typical. Like I go,
Mm-hmm.
okay, yeah, like I would probably do the same thing too if someone just charged at me and tried to touch me, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Um, and I during the train I explained to people how dogs perceive the world just to help them understand, because your dog people think dogs see the world the way humans see the world, and that's not the case. Okay. So in terms of how I'd handle this, the first thing I do with it, like, because your dog is not an aggressive dog. Your dog can become aggressive or defensive to protect herself. Okay,
Yeah.
it's very different. So what dictates how I handle these cases is really that. So I get home cases where I can't even walk into the home. The dog will just straight up attack, unprovoked. I just walk in. Okay,
Yeah.
uh, that's more so like an aggressive dog, because they use aggression to handle everything, and they do it without reservation. Okay, so then obedience has nothing to do with that, because I need to stop the aggression first before we can even teach the dog anything. Your case is what I would call an indirect case. Okay, there's nervousness and fear. We know that. Is I start off with the leash walking exercise, uh, and I don't care about the leash walking exercise. I care about the discipline behind the exercise. I care about the remote and the physicality behind the exercise. Okay, the obedience isn't what's fixing or helping to address issues. It's the fact that she's being disciplined. Okay, and on my YouTube channel, and you can check it out after the consultation, I have a couple of videos called Dog Training Highlights in a playlist. Okay?
Okay.
And a couple of them of note is Lake, and the other one would be Ruthie.
Is
Okay.
Lake the pit bull?
Yes.
I
The
watched
very
that one, I think.
okay.
Yeah.
So I in the video, in the full video, I talk to him and I go, look, I know the issue is behavior. I know. Okay. But instead of going out and saying, let's let her be a bad girl and punish her, I go, how about we just discipline her outside of the problem and see what does it fix, right? And then they came back class 2 and they're like, holy shit, it was a 180, okay? Other trainers see the problem and they go, oh, your dog is aggressive, so let's just punish the aggression. But I go, why is the dog being aggressive? That's me. And it's almost always due to stress, okay? Aggression is a stress response. So if someone corners you in an alley by yourself,
Mm-hmm.
I would think you would become aggressive to defend
Yeah.
yourself, right?
Yep.
It's a stress response. So I go, if we discipline the dog to calm them down so that they can perceive the world normally and not be under stress, what does it fix? Okay, and then we start to address things according to how the dog's progressing. Now, Lake just happened to be a very easy, just boom, 180 turnaround, and it's been a pretty straightforward process. Ruthie is a nervous puppy. She was 6, 7 months old, was barking at everyone and everything. And then again, one class, because I said the same thing. I'm like, let's do something to settle her down and see what does it fix. And then come back class 2, they're like, she's so calm. Like her barking has dropped like tremendously. She only barks at certain things now. And I'll go, what is she barking at? So like when someone knocks, or if like the UPS guy walks up to her door, and I'm like, that's normal. Okay, that's not barking at every little thing that's happening. That's too much stress. That's nervousness. Okay, so your case is very much the same, but your case does have some touch sensitivity, which is something that I would plan on addressing. So if I try to touch her the first day, I would expect a really like the worst response that we would ever see. Okay, because she's under too much stress, nothing's been done. If I do structure first and then touch her, we may, one, not even see a response, or two, if we see a response, it's going to be very minimal because her stress levels have gone down. A case like that would be Ollie, who's on my YouTube channel right now, who was both human and dog reactive. And then last class, I think it was class 7, I was teaching the owner how to, like, I was going in his personal space and stuff like that, and he was completely fine with me. He was even leaning into me, but I'd given him time to ease into it, but then I was showing his owner how to ease him into new people. Okay, I don't know how the case is going to work out. I just have a general idea, And it's just, I go, what happened this week? And that's what dictates how we move the second class. Okay, so there's kind of a formula, but it changes because every case is different. Your case, I would most likely do first 2 classes, just leash walking stuff, discipline, and see what happens. How does it change her in any way? And you might find she's calmer in the house. She's calmer outside in more populated areas. And I go, cool. You know, it's settling her down. So now she's, earlier when I mentioned, you know, you're exposing her and her stress levels are going up, but nothing's bringing them back down again. That's what these exercises do. Okay, is it allows you to bring it into an environment, and if she does get stressed, it allows you to bring it back down again. So then when she's in that environment again, she's thinking, I can be here without being stressed. Okay, then we move on to the next topic. Next topic would be touch. Okay, how do we get her to approach people? How do we build trust with people she doesn't know? How do we get her comfortable with kids, right? For that, I would highly suggest we do muzzle, okay? Because 1, we're gonna be pressing boundaries, okay? And by doing so, I anticipate we're gonna see some responses. Now, I have a suit and I have a sleeve that I can wear that protects me. Obviously, your friends and family or whatever aren't gonna have these things. So the muzzle allows you to press those thresholds and see what happens, okay? It also puts the people that you're going to be using at ease, because it's funny because people will touch your dog without permission, no problem. But the moment you tell someone, hey, would you pet my dog? I'm trying to socialize her, they won't. Okay? They're like, why? I'm like, oh, because she wasn't socialized when she was younger, so I'm trying to socialize her. They're like, no, thank you. I swear to God, for 10 years, it is so funny. People will touch your dog with no permission, but the moment you say, would you please touch my dog? I'm trying to socialize her, they'll go no.
Yeah. It sounds like it's like a trap to them.
Yes, so it's super funny. So muzzle comes into play there, okay? It helps put you at ease. It helps you expose her even more, at least while you're trying to figure out where's the threshold, right? If something bad happens, we correct it and we keep moving on. People see something bad happen and then they go, oh, nope, don't want to do this. And they back off, and then you get stuck. Okay, so that's the one thing about socialization, is it does require you to put yourself in those situations. Okay, but I give you all the exercises. It's up to you to then go on and practice them. What dictates how long the turnaround process is how often do you do it? You know, like I've had families and they'd have like a person over once a month. And I'm like, yeah, this is going to be a very long process if it ever happens. I've had people, they're like, we're super social. If it wasn't for the dog, we'd have people over 3 to 4 times a week. And I go, okay, cool. Now that we've gotten this far and you have the exercises, go back to your normal life, right? And then 2-3 weeks later, they're like, Jesse, dog is great. Because they had people over so much, it's a very quick turnaround, right? And there's others where they expose the dog and stuff, and they're like, you know what, Jesse, the dog is great with people I know, with my friends, but strangers, it's still like, no. And I go, that's fine too. You know, I don't say hello and give everybody I see a hug, right? But everybody expects dogs to do that.
Yeah.
What I think about is what's realistic. People within the home, people that come into the home, friends, family, okay? I could care less about anybody else in the world that I don't know, okay? My dogs are perfectly sociable. I don't let people touch my dogs, okay? And I get stopped all the time. I'm like, nope, and I just keep walking, okay? The kind of patio thing, that would be something that may possibly be addressed just through the structure of like de-stressing her and in the discipline, okay? Otherwise, I would teach you, this is what I would do in that environment, because that whole scenario, although not acceptable in the human world, was actually totally valid in her world.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's kind of, yeah, that's at least, that was my perspective, but for the patio thing, just very quickly, this was only our second time in a patio. The other one was not an enclosed patio, so it was a little different, and she did well there, but she also was just like, seemed a little bit confused as to why we were just there. And a very sweet female server tried to keep pet, like very softly came over, tried to pet her, bring her treats, everything. And she was just very, very shy, very like standoffish.
Sure.
So it would be good to, yeah. But anyways, I digress.
So because I have a client after you, I'm going to just go over real quick your options.
Okay.
So I have 6, 9, and 12-week programs. Okay. I tackle what you're wanting and needing and what I feel you'll need. Okay. So if your primary concern is behavior, you can go with as short as the 6-week program. Okay. 6 classes, 1 day a week. The first 2 classes on the leash walking, that has to happen because I want to see what does that fix. Okay. Class 3, we're doing touch sensitivity exercises. And then I would give you the information on like, okay, we did the touch stuff. She did great. This is how you would start incorporating it with your friends, family, and stuff like that. Okay. I would highly suggest muzzle. It just puts everybody at ease. Okay. Because if there were to be, because if we're pressing thresholds here, if there were to be an incident, the one that's going to pay for it is Masha.
Yeah.
Okay. The places like laws don't excuse like where it came from. It's just if your dog bit someone, your dog bit someone. Okay. If you're wanting more control, okay. So I would do, because if everything's going well, like how I imagined it would go, it'd be 2 classes on leash walking, the 3rd class on the socialization stuff. By the 4th class, you're like, you know what, Jesse, it's actually been going pretty good. She's doing well with accepting in new environments. She's seemingly calmer. Then I go, great, keep exposing her. We're just going to do more control. Okay. Now, in my opinion, recall is the next important thing. However, in your case, we might actually do some kind of stationary control first. Meaning, so like if you go to a patio, I look at the environment of the patio and I think if I sit down here, I don't have to worry about anybody coming from behind and people coming over from over here. So I can have Masha here and I don't have to worry about people coming up from behind her and spooking her, right? So it's a blend of, hey, Masha, you go here, don't move, but then also a blend of reading my environment and thinking, where can I place myself that puts me at a better advantage? Does that make sense?
It does. I don't know if that's always going to be doable with all the different,
Yeah, no, for sure,
restrictions,
right?
But
so then the next thing is you have to build awareness. Okay, people tend to get complacent. They see, oh, I've made so much progress with my dog, I don't need to do anything anymore. That's not how it works.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's like with crossing the street, right? The idea here is if my light is green and their light is red, I can cross the street no problem, right? I still double check because I've almost been hit by a car 3 times because someone didn't stop at the red light. Okay, but that would have been complacency, you know, like thinking like, oh, okay, like there's laws and this is green, this is red, whatever, I'm safe, and I go and assume things can still happen because you can't account for the world. Okay, so then I teach you how to be a good handler. So for me, if I have a dog like Masha, I just naturally, if I see the waiter approaching, I look at Masha because I know where that's where the problem's going to come from, not the waiter, right? So if I'm looking at Masha and she's doing fine, and all of a sudden I hear the waiter cooing at my dog, and, oh, would you please don't? She's, you know, we're working on socializing, right? Then I just shift gears and go, oh, you did something I wasn't planning for. You know, that's being a good handler. So it's not just teaching Masha how to handle the world, but teaching you how to help navigate her through the world, but also establishing control when needed. Okay, because that's just how it is. You know, obedience is if the world is black and white and everything is perfect, but that's not how the world works. It's going to throw you crazy stuff. So I teach you how to handle the world when it throws you crazy stuff. Okay. So the 6-week program would be the shortest, and it's like, okay, bare bones, this is what you're going to need. I think this is what you want, and I think this is what you're going to need. Okay. And then you do it, and then everything's great. Well, thank you. Otherwise, if you're wanting more control obedience-wise, that's where the 9 and 12-week program comes into play. The 12-week is for a fully off-leash trained dog, variable being Masha's behavior. So if her behavior, for whatever reason, took longer or more classes, we may not cover everything because we spent more time on the behavior. If you decide at the end of the 12 weeks, you're like, hey, you know, like I would really like to learn these things, then we would just prorate you whatever number of classes you need. Same thing with the 9-week program. In my experience, whenever anybody's ever done the 12, we've always got it done unless it was a really severe case, in which case they would do a behavior program, which is a different thing on its own. Okay. So I think you're in that 6-week range. 9-week is kind of like if you want to be safe and you know you have more time. 12-week is if you're like, you know what, I want to be safe and also know that I'm going to have a fully trained dog as long as you do the homework and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Masha is only like 30 pounds, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is her. She's tiny.
So you technically have 2 choices, and Maria's going to send you the information on this for the e-collar. One is for 35-pound dogs and under. One is for 70-pound dogs and under. Okay.
Okay.
I would actually suggest you go with the 70-pound dog and under one because it tends to have a more duller feel. Okay. Whereas the one for a smaller dog tends to be a little bit sharper. And it's kind of like, let's say worst case scenario, something's happening with Masha, maybe she's scared and running away or something, and you need her to return, you can override her mental state with more power. Okay. All it means is you get more from less. So on the smaller collar, you might be at 45, but on the bigger collar, you might be at 20, 25 on a scale of 101 to 127. Okay. So it just gives you a little bit more wiggle room. Questions?
No, not yet.
Okay. Last thing would be, everybody always asks, when does the e-collar go away? In my book, when you need it, it doesn't. Okay. It doesn't mean you're always using it. It just means after you've done all the work, right? Fast forward 6 months, Masha is great, no issues. You know, people are petting her and all that stuff. But then one day, out of the blue, someone just surprises the crap out of everybody and like starts petting her at a red light, right? Is you want to have the means of control because it's caught everybody by surprise. Maybe she's like, oh, and she like blows up, and now you can still stop her. As opposed to it happens, nothing stopped her, and the next thing you know, you've taken 10 steps back. Okay, because you want to account for life. Life is going to throw you stuff where you're not planning for it, and it just happens. It happened to a client the other day. Their dog is completely social, and they just started doing their come and call training. And they were at Lincoln Park over by the lakefront. And there was, I think, a dad with their kid or something. And the dog started charging towards the kid barking. And it freaked the owner out, but the owner panicked. Instead of using the remote like the owner chased their dog, which everybody does. But then when, they had their lesson, she's like, I'm going to tell you about what happened. And then she's like, this happened. And she's like, I just thought to myself, I should have used my remote. But instead I panicked and chased my dog down. And she's like, would that have been a good scenario? I'm like, yes, because it teaches you how to respond within the moment and jump to the tool that's going to give you that control right away.
Does the dog realize that, like, what to do? So say she, in that scenario, right? The dog is running, then gets that shock, and then they just stop, and then they realize, like, oh, this means I got to return to my owner or my safe space. Or does that just mean that they like take a second to, stop, and then they can keep running again and charging again?
It'll disrupt the behavior. The dog will most likely return because it's been taught to come when called. So they default to what they know. Okay. The other thing is, you drive?
I do. I don't have a car here though, but yes.
Okay, but you've driven?
Yes.
Yeah. You've been on the expressway?
Yes.
Did you go the speed limit?
No.
Okay.
I mean, yes, if anyone's listening, then yes.
They said no. Most people don't go the speed limit, right? But then they see a squad car, and what do?
Go the speed limit or brake.
Right, because they're going to get a ticket.
Yeah.
Okay? So when it comes to dog and dog behavior, I look at the e-collar as a cop on the collar. Okay, when it's present, it keeps the dog in check because it knows there's consequence or the threat of consequence, right? Because everybody always asks, like, why, if the dog should learn to know better. I'm like, people don't even know better. I mean, we know better, we just don't do better. Like, I see it all the time. Like, I myself speed on the expressway, right? Because I know I can get away with it. It's called opportunistic behavior. So it's the same thing for Masha. If the collar is off and someone is touching her, you might find she's like, hey, no one can stop me now. And I'm going to growl, right? it's normal type behavior. Yes, I do get cases where the owners get past the point where they don't need the collar. I just don't know how it's going to work out because it depends on how much the owner puts work into it. It depends on the severity of the behavior for the dog. It also depends on the environment. If the owner's at a busy bar, right, where there's a lot of people and stuff, I would think there's going to be a very high risk because it's such a busy environment as opposed to like within the home when it's just a handful of people coming over, you know? So all these things are variables. Having that e-collar just lets me know I'm going to have much more consistent behavior, but also the means of stopping something should something arise. Okay.
Yeah.
That's just being realistic.
And as far as the muzzle that you reference, are there specific options that you would recommend?
Baskerville.
Basket. Okay.
Yeah. Maria will send you a link. We have muzzle training videos on our website.
Okay.
It's under our training resources section, but I'll have her send you the muzzle information, and you want to start that process immediately. Okay. Muzzle training can be overnight, or it can take weeks before the dog is comfortable.
And that's just if we're going for walks, essentially, or like a park or something, anywhere where there would be other people.
Anywhere where you're going to be pressing the touch. Right.
Okay.
So if she's fine on walks and stuff and minds her business, then you're okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. If you're going to go to, like, let's say the patio again, right?
Gotcha.
Like you had that one moment, I would advise do it there. And then maybe you go to a patio 25 times and you get that occurrence 25 times and you're like, Jesse, man, she hasn't lunged at all and she's really relaxed. Then I go, well, then I would say it's safe to assume that we're over that hump. But you always still want to be aware. Remember, we don't want to get complacent. You always want to be in control so that this way Masha doesn't feel like she has to act out. Okay? Because I swear to God, man, so many clients, again, they get complacent. They're like, Jesse, the one time that I was like a little bit relaxed, you know, and lenient on my dog, something happened. I'm like, yep, that's how it works. Okay? So it was a pleasure to meet you. If you have any questions, you let us know. Maria's going to follow up with you with any information. And then, you know, feel free, again, to watch more of those videos. And we put them up for a reason, let people know, you know, this is what we do and it's effective. And then she'll handle everything else after this, okay?
Okay. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Take care.
You too.